After his failed attempt of escaping with Captain Callie's lost treasure, Sailor John was sentenced to prison for his crimes. During his years of imprisonment, John has been plotting his escape and seeking revenge on the one responsible for his imprisonment, Thomas the Tank Engine. And now, Sailor... Sa- Sailor John will finally have his chance for revenge.
Okay. I'm good. I'm good.
I couldn't keep it together that time.
Yeah, you did pretty good the first time.
Yeah, the first time I didn't crack up at all.
I'm sorry. It was my
No,
fault.
Iron Bard's or Cage. That's quite the poetic title.
Yeah, it's a pretty dope title.
Rated T, and it's angst/crime.
Genre. Oh man. It is complete. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. It's okay. It's
You
okay.
smacked my
I'm
screen.
sorry. All right, let's
A
get started.
plus,
For real.
A minus,
Oh.
A. Wait,
Stop.
can we choose the font?
Oh my god.
Oh my god.
You can make it small. Make it small. Why you would want to do that, I don't... Okay, too big. Why?
Okay.
Or actually, I don't...
Should I make it bigger for the stream so that smaller screens can see it?
Sure.
All right, that would be good, right? What does that mean? What's this mean?
Story
with.
with. Oh.
All right, whatever. Let's not screw with that stuff.
Okay. Alright. So, the island of Sodor has many railways going on and around it. It has peaceful towns and pleasant landscapes for many to enjoy. But for those who do endanger the peace, like every country, there is a prison department to hold those to break the law from society. Isolated from the rest of the island, the Sodrian prison department is in a remote, wide area.
Is that Sodor's? Like,
I would assume, because...
that's really weird.
Wide area where almost no one visits except the police, interrogators, and sometimes the Sudrian military. Right now, in this very prison, sitting in his cell day in and day out for almost 2 years now, is one of Thomas's most mysterious but dangerous past enemies, none other than Sailor John himself. When Thomas was sent to help build the Harwick branch line, Sailor John saw when he discovered Captain Kale's ship and thought he could prove useful in finding the treasure too. But when Marion found the treasure and the Fat Controller arranged for it to be sent to the museum, Sailor John had broken into his office and stole the treasure from Knapford Station, only to be chased down by Thomas. Sailor John had stolen the ship in an attempt to escape, but the small railway engines and Ryan helped Thomas to overturn the ship, and Skiff the railboat ended up betraying Sailor John and making him lose the treasure.
Alright, let's, seriously. Oh god. Alright, when am I gonna start reading?
Right about here. Sitting in his stone cell behind bars, Sailor John could still hear his sentencing ringing clear through his ears.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, look in the dock and see the very man before us, said the judge. He has been found guilty of blowing up Sir Thompson Hatt's office at Knapford Station to steal the treasure, stealing Captain Callie's ancient ship, and a dangerous attempt to blow Thomas up with dynamite.
What?
Yeah, is there a prequel to this? I'm curious.
Huh.
Court clerk, would you tell me, please, what is the strictest penalty we can impose for this man's offenses? Some people would argue that stealing the treasure was the most grave offense, but stealing the ship and attempting to blow up Thomas with dynamite both undoubtedly carry the most severe penalties. I therefore suggest 18 months for breaking and entering Sir Thompson Hatt's office, 6 months for stealing the treasure, and 3 years for thieving the ship, and 5 years for attempted destruction against
What?
Thomas.
5 years?
Together, that's a total of 10 years.
Okay, buddy.
Okay, sure. 10 years it is then, grunted the judge as he banged the gavel to settle the sentence. The gavel? The gravel. And Sailor John, if you ever appear in this courthouse again, we will need to deal with you much more seriously. Sailor John suddenly looked up, and through the bars of his cell, a guard slowly walked past, looking intently at him as well as the rest of the inmates. I've only served my first 2 offenses, according to adding to 2 years. 8 years to go, but I don't think so. John growled very quietly to himself. One day soon I'll spring free and Thomas will pay for what he did to me. And Skiff. Mutiny. Treachery. He'll be driftwood for sure. I cannot say when I'll be out, but I certainly will get out. And then I will be avenged. You... Avenged?
It's okay. But that was easier said than done. The prison was heavily guarded and stood at 30 feet all around. Even with that said, Sailor John had already done a few things to ease his life in prison. He reached under his modest pillow on his bed and pulled out a makeshift key built out of a fork and smiled impressively. It was no ordinary fork. It helped John pick the lock on his cell so he could leave it when no guards were around. Wow. Cool kid.
You mean the man to eat donuts?
After only a few months after he was sent here, Sailor John had managed to take a job in the prison kitchen, serving bland, boring food almost like gruel to the fellow inmates, while much to his chagrin and envy, more proper food was given to the guards and warden. Then one day, when no one was looking, Sailor John had taken one of the forks from the kitchen and kept it for his own. He then carefully bent and modified it into something thin and sharp that would let him open his cell without a key. Wow. Sailor John spent a few hours in his cell, staring at this forked key, thinking, "Just how to get out," he whispered.
Alright. Use my knowledge. I beg you, whispered a voice from the cell beside him. John carefully looked around. There was no guards to be seen. He carefully picked his lock and walked over to that cell, where another inmate was. What was that? Larry Death? What? John asked. In his cell was another inmate named Larry Montague, who was nicknamed Larry Death since he worked in the prison morgue ever since he was brought here. Oh. Okay. I'm getting you out of here. See? Murmured Larry. I know what it's like to be cut off from the rest of the world. It makes you want to destroy everything around you. And I haven't forgotten what you did for me, Johnny. Sometime after you came here, you became head chef of this place, and would give me extra rice pudding portions. Give me extra rice pudding portions to me. That's some good grammar right there. As such, I wish to show you my gratitude.
What's the problem?
Give me extra rice pudding portions to me.
I guess.
As such, I wish to show you my gratitude. In return for serving me extra food and bonding with me, I have a plan to break you out. I've had a possibility in mind for a few days now. Really? Said Sailor John. How are going to get to me get out?
Oh.
How are going to me get out?
It was pretty good up until this point.
Yeah. The prison walls are 30 feet high and the hallways are crawling with armed guards. I have it all worked out. You remember Marcus Fitzgerald? Said Larry, a mass murderer of the past. He's been held here for as long as anyone can remember, but now the poor lad is battling terminal cancer, and his chances of survival are fading quickly. The warden doesn't expect him to live much longer, and as you know, Fitzgerald has no living relatives, and for that reason he is to be buried in the prison cemetery.
I know all that, said Sailor John, becoming a little impatient. So what can we use an ill man for? Listen, smirked Larry. Whenever he dies, which should be quite soon, when his funeral is being arranged, I'll slip you out, get to the morgue, and hide you in this casket. I will then put holes in the casket, which will provide you 5 hours of air once we bury the coffin. I should be able to dig you out in time, and then you'll be free. You will be at large again. What do you say? Sailor John remained silent for quite a while, pondering his thought. To be buried alive, even for just a few hours, was a deadly and dangerous plan to put into action, and even for him it sounded very dark, twisted, and horrific to even think about. But if he stood any chance at all of escaping and enjoying the open world again, he would not pass it up. I accept, he whispered darkly. He reached his hand through the bars and shook Larry's hand. So be it, Larry whispered back. Oh my God.
That's some pretty crazy stuff.
Dang.
Reflections on the events so far.
He should be able to dig the guy up.
He should, yes, yes.
But
That's a pretty crazy plan, man.
But he might not.
Yeah, he's gotta kill Thomas. He's gotta kill Thomas.
Gotta kill Thomas.
It's gotta happen.
Oh man.
The next 2 days were mostly uneventful. Sailor John kept his head down, waiting for any news of Fitzgerald's death, as he succumbed to cancer worse and worse. Larry kept his promise for whenever the chance would come, and when no guards were about, Sailor John would keep staring at his fork key, constantly wondering about what would happen when the plan would be carried out. What? He kept his promise without doing anything? Was that what? He kept his promise for whenever the chance would come. Okay. Whatever. Then on the third morning, Sailor John was asleep on his prison bed, keeping the key under the pillow. He slowly woke up and leaned out of the bed. He fetched his fork key and hid it inside his striped clothes. He then looked through the bars of his cell, wondering once again if the bargain he struck with Larry. Suddenly a guard came walking to his cell. "Breakfast is starting, Chef John. We need you in the kitchen. Get to it," he snapped as he opened John's cell. Sailor John said nothing as he was escorted to the kitchen. On the way, he passed 2 more guards who were seemingly whispering to each other about something, making him wonder. In the prison kitchen, Sailor John was put to cooking a fresh pot of gruel for the breakfast inmates, occasionally glancing up at the prison guard who was holding a rifle and did not look happy. Eventually, when the gruel was done, John began to serve it to the inmates until he saw Larry step up to the bowl.
"John," he whispered. Sailor John's ears flinched and he looked up. "What is it?" he whispered ever so quietly. Larry leaned in, whispering low. "Wait, isn't that guy, like, right next to him?"
Yeah.
"I just heard Marcus Fitzgerald is dead." "Really?" smiled Sailor John. "Yes," whispered Larry. "His body has been taken to the morgue. He is to be buried tonight, and 2 guards told me to host the burial." "Perfect." Sailor John smiled even more. "Are we still agreed?" Okay, well, everything up until that point, I feel like, was okay. But, like, now that he's, like...
talking about the plan.
I don't know.
In front of the guard.
Just, whatever. "Yes," whispered Larry. "I'll sneak you into the morgue, then I'll help you escape." The guard could see the lineup had stopped, and he shouted to Sailor John, "Get back to work, pirate!" "Of course," John replied, as he served Larry as well as the other inmates. After breakfast, John was ordered to return to his cell until the lunch and dinner shifts. He served both times later that day, becoming more and more excited that he would soon be free at last, but also a little afraid if something would go wrong. As soon as night fell, Sailor John and Larry Death stayed fully alert, waiting for the guard's shift to be done for the evening. Eventually, the guard walked to Larry's cell and let him out. "Well, Larry," he said, "Fitzgerald's burial is due soon. Get to that morgue shortly so we can dispose of the body." "Yes, sir," murmured Larry. He waited until the guard left the hallway. Then he walked to Sailor John's cell. "All clear, Johnny. All clear," he smirked. Sailor John fetched his key one more time and opened his cell. "Take me, then," he ordered. Larry winked and led the way for Sailor John. They crept silently through the hallways, taking great care not to be seen by any guards until they reached the morgue as planned. Inside, there were several empty coffins being reserved for future burials, and one that was shut and occupied, but also had a few holes poked in it. Sailor John looked at it with interest. "Is that," he whispered. "Fitzgerald," said Larry. He opened the casket, and there was a decrepit and ghastly corpse of a man, pale, vacant, and cold, not to mention smelling awful. "Get in," ordered Larry.
Oh boy. Sailor John looked at the body, and then at Larry a few times. "I'll only get in if you swear on your honor you won't fail me. I don't like small, dark places, much less being buried alive." "You have nothing to fear," smirked Larry. It's only once in your lifetime." Sailor John sighed and finally laid inside the coffin on top of Fitzgerald's corpse. Oh, God.
Okay.
Larry smirked. I love how that's not one of the things that he complained about, is having to lay on top of a dead body. Larry
That
smirked
smells.
impressively as he shut the lid full of holes to help Sailor John breathe. Already, Sailor John felt claustrophobic, being squeezed by the body and coffin lid for 10 minutes before he suddenly felt levitated. Larry and a coffin helper were now carrying the coffin through the prison to the cemetery. John heard the prison gates shut loudly from outside. Then, for a few minutes, he felt awkward as he was carried across the yard to the prison cemetery. Suddenly, he felt himself thudded down on the ground. He dared not make a sound, listening for anything. Suddenly, he heard someone speaking Latin for Fitzgerald's prison funeral. To Sailor John, it seemed pointless, wishing Larry would hurry up. After a few more minutes, Sailor John heard the scraping of earth almost right beside his coffin. Suddenly, the coffin was lifted up again, and he was now being lowered into the hole, dug 6 feet deep. Once he was placed at the bottom, Larry began filling the hole so he could wait for the moment to dig John up and let him escape. Sailor John's heart was beating rapidly within himself, as he knew he'd only last 5 hours if his chance didn't come. Suddenly, the digging and burying stopped. The only sound for Sailor John to hear now was the beating of his own heart as well as his own breathing. How does he know it's 5 hours, like, exactly? How did they calculate that?
I don't know. Maybe he like tried to do it with a different guy.
And died after 5 hours? Okay.
I don't
Sure.
know. Alright. Mustn't panic, he said, taking deep, heavy breaths. Must conserve air. After only a few minutes, he felt quite stuffy inside the coffin, and the smell of Fitzgerald's steadily rotting corpse was already overwhelming. Ew.
Yeah.
Making John cough and struggle. Mustn't panic, he kept repeated. He tried not to panic, but every minute went by like 10 minutes. What's taking that bastard so long? Finally, 1 hour later, Sailor John suddenly heard a sound. Earth was being dug up again, as he hoped. Then he heard Larry's shovel hitting the lid of the coffin, and soon enough the coffin was open and Larry hauled Sailor John out of the coffin into the cold night air. A deal is a deal, Johnny, said Larry. You're loose now. Thank you so much, Sailor John smiled. Your work is finished. For good. Suddenly, he seized Larry's shovel, jolted Larry around, and whacked him in the back of the head, knocking him out. Larry's body stumbled into the coffin, and John slammed it shut. He then got to work and hastily climbed out of the hole and filled it in with all the soil. Larry Montague was buried alive and would suffocate from no oxygen anyway.
Well, for one, how did Larry get away from the guards to be able to dig him out? He's also a prisoner.
I don't know.
And also, what a frick.
What a frick. At last, Sailor John whispered, he slowly and happily stepped over the fence and walked pleasantly into the night to find a new place to hide. As he walked through the thick forest, he took a deep breath in and sighed with pleasure. At last, he was in the fresh, free air again, and he was now ready to start making preparations to strike back slowly. He didn't want to do everything in one single day. He wanted his revenge to be hinted over the course of several weeks, with just occasional disturbances. He wanted society to really feel his anger and rage over a slow and steady course of time, and yet not find signs of him. Everything is proceeding as I have foreseen, he sneered, and with that Sailor John walked on through the night, cackling.
That night in Knapford Sheds, Thomas and Emily were asleep together after another routine kissing. This isn't one of those Thomas and Emily fanfictions! And we still get it!
It is now.
God damn it.
Wait, real quickly, let me just... Well, I mean, it kind of was right there.
Oh! I see, I never noticed that.
It was right there, I thought it was. Oh.
Oh no.
Alright, keep going.
Then something slowly began to open their shed door, then a silhouette with a navy hat began slowly stepping inside towards the sleeping engines, until a fizzling sound was heard. Then Thomas opened his eyes to see someone's hand rise up with a roll of burning dynamite. Thomas suddenly woke up and looked around. It was just a dream, and there was nothing there. The door was still shut, and the moon shone brightly through the shed window. He looked at Emily, still sleeping peacefully in his holdings. Silent release. He kissed her lips and in his sleep, making her.
Oh God.
I can't read your reading.
Ooh,
Skip ahead.
Tommy.
Yeah,
She yawned, remaining asleep. Emily.
Why? Why?
Thomas murmured as his eyes shut again. But outside Knapford's sheds, one particularly navy hat blew through the air by itself, carried away by the wind, and into the darkness. Well, that's the end. Dude. Stupid. Stupid. Was it though? Danny was just like, oh God.
I can't. Oh my God. Well, we read one.
Hey,
Can
we
stream
got through one.
Do you think we can stream like
A normal thing now?
a normal thing? Yes.
Yes.
Such as, hey, oh wait, you didn't watch the last Net episode, have you? Or the last Metro Prime episode. So we can't do those. Dude, the last episode of Metro Prime 2 was dope. What are we doing?
Alright, that was an interesting,
Nope, nothing new yet from Sammy.
Alright! Fanfiction was pretty cool?
Yeah.
Question mark?
That was nor Iron Bars the Cage. When was it made?
February 1st.
February 1st.
Okay, cool.
So,
I guess.
should we follow it for chapter 2 when it comes out?
Why would there be a chapter 2?
What?
Thomas got blown up. Yeah. Did you not get free? This is, towards the sleeping engines. Thomas opened his eyes to see someone's hand rise up with
It was a dream, though.
Dang, wait.
It was a dream.
Oh, no. Oh, God. Oh, God. I just, dang it.
It was just a dream. He hasn't killed him yet.
Oh, man. I was gonna say, that felt a bit out of character.
Yeah.
Alright.
So, February 1st, that's not that long ago. Like, maybe if it was like 6 months ago, maybe I'd be like, oh, she's probably not making it up. I don't think so.
No.
Alright.
How fancy.
My couples. What?
Wow. Alright, cool.
Doing that for the next video, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.
Bye.